It's good to see everybody this morning, and we have a kind of a fresh spring day here today. It's the rain just stopped, and we're starting on a fresh topic for these Saturday morning talks. So I sent an email, hopefully, to everybody explaining that we're going to be talking about Shobogenzo Makahannyaharamitsu, which is Dogen Zenji's sort of commentary on the Heart Sutra. It's a commentary of sorts. And I think it's really important chapter of the Shobogenzo, and really important piece in understanding Dogen Zenji's teaching. And so I spoke about the Heart Sutra a couple of years ago, I think, and made some recordings that are actually on YouTube. So really, really to study this fascicle, you need to study the Heart Sutra. We'll do some of that as we go, but if you're interested, you could listen to those talks, or just, I'm assuming everybody's familiar with the Heart Sutra and have heard it, read it. And we will, be referring to it as we go. Of course, we'll have to study it somewhat as we go. But if you're interested and have time, you could take a look at those talks. Or there's an excellent commentary on the Heart Sutra in my teacher's book, Living by Vow. And so if you want to study the Heart Sutra with that, that's an option too. It's there's Red Pine's book, but as I say, we'll be referring back to it too. But this is the second, or Dogen Zenji placed this chapter as the second chapter of Shobogenzo in the version that he compiled. So he considered it really important, I think. And it was actually the first chapter of Shobogenzo that he wrote. So Genjo Koan is the first chapter, and Makahannyaharamitsu is the second, but they were written in the same year. And Makahannyaharamitsu was actually written first in the year of 1230. So, no, I'm sorry, it was 1233. So Dogen Zenji was 33 years old when he wrote this. So, Dogen Zenji, you may be familiar, you're probably familiar with his life, and it's always good to kind of review a little bit the circumstances of what was happening when he wrote this. So he had, of course, Dogen Zenji went to China as a young man. He returned in 1227, but he went, with his Rinzai teacher, Myozen, to look for the true Dharma, to answer his question, the traditional question that was, if we're all enlightened from the beginning, if all beings are Buddha and we're all inherently enlightened, why do we have to practice? So he felt that he found the answer with a teacher that he met, Tiantong Rujing, or Tendo Nyojo. And he received Dharma transmission from him and came back from China in 1227. And so the first thing that he wrote when he got back was Fukan Zazengi, which is the meditation manual for Zazen, the universal recommendations for Zazen. That was the first thing he wrote. And the second thing he wrote was Bendo Wa, which we studied a little bit of recently, 2 weeks ago. We just finished up a piece from Bendo Wa, the Jiju Zanmai section, which is kind of the core, in my view, of his teaching on Zazen. But that's not actually part of Shobogenzo, even though it's included in some compilations as part of it, but it's not actually part of Shobogenzo. So he came back from China, and he studied for a little while at the Rinzai monastery that he had practiced at with his original teacher, who unfortunately died in China, by the way. His name was Myozen, and he was, he didn't come back with Dogen Zenji. But they went back to that monastery, and he went back and he didn't want to stay. He felt that somehow the practice there wasn't suited. He wasn't suited to it, or it wasn't a good fit, or it wasn't genuine, sincere practice that he was looking for. And he stayed in a small kind of hermitage for some period with maybe some of his early disciples. But let's see, it was 12. So it wasn't until 1233 that he had his first summer practice period at Koshoji, the original monastery that he first established. And it was during this first practice period that he wrote this fascicle, Makahannyaharamitsu. And it was the first thing he wrote, as part of his work, Shobogenzo. So it kind of shows us that it's probably a really important piece for him. And then it's interesting that he didn't write another chapter of Shobogenzo until 4 years later. So probably he was busy establishing his monastery, and he wrote some, more practical kind of practice, direct practice instruction type writings during that time, but he didn't write any kind of, broader writing, like something, it's not philosophical, but we kind of call it that, philosophical. Dogen Zenji is kind of the anti-philosophy, but we think of his work, Shobogenzo, as kind of his great philosophical work, but he didn't write another chapter of that until 1237. So that's just the kind of basic background behind the text and what was happening in Dogen Zenji's life. And as I sent out in that email, there's a synopsis of his life in Realizing Genjo Koan, another book that my teacher wrote. And this is a kind of it's a chapter taken from Kim Ji-hee's book that's kind of at one point, for most of the time that I've been practicing, it's been considered kind of the definitive biography of Dogen Zenji. I know there's some more that have come out since then, but that chapter it's kind of nice to read it there, because my teacher went through and made notes where he felt like it needed to be adjusted. So there was a lot of stuff in there that was, in his view, inaccurate. And I guess there was probably scholarship that had happened since it had been first published. And so it's, an updated version of Dogen Zenji's life. And it's not, super long. It's not book length or anything. So I would recommend reading that as a refresher if you want it, or just are not as familiar with Dogen Zenji's life. And another thing I should mention too is there is, Kosho Uchiyama had a commentary on this Makahannyaharamitsu too, which is published. It's called, it's part of some other fascicles that he commented on too, that was translated by my teacher and published a few years ago. It's called Deepest Practice, Deepest Wisdom, I think. And if you're interested in that, you can find it, anywhere that you would find books, probably. I know it's on Amazon. I don't want to just be promoting Amazon, but I know it's there. And also there are commentaries by my teacher on this in the Dharma Eye journal. It's the official Soto Zen journal. And so he writes, he usually writes 2 articles a year for that journal. And I think it starts in volume 21. If you're interested in this, and you can't find it, let me know and I'll send you, the link or something. But he wrote several articles on this Makahannyaharamitsu too. So those are options for study on your own. And I would recommend, that we kind of go along together, and we'll know maybe, next week what we're going to be talking about. So for this week, I'm just going to really read the text, and I'm going to try to share a little bit of what it means to me. And I think we probably won't really get into talking about more specific things in the text, so probably next week, and even some more kind of broader things about how it relates to early Buddhism and the Heart Sutra. We'll probably won't have time to talk about that today, but let me go ahead and read it. It's not super long, but it's probably going to take 10 minutes or so, I bet. So Shobogenzo Makahannyaharamitsu, the time of Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva practicing profound prajna paramita is the whole body, clearly seeing the emptiness of all 5 skandhas, or all 5 aggregates. The 5 aggregates are forms, sensations, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness. This is the 5-fold prajna. Clear seeing is itself prajna. To unfold and manifest this essential truth, the Heart Sutra states that form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. Form is nothing but form. Emptiness is nothing but emptiness. 100 blades of grass, 10,000 things. The 12 sense fields are 12 instances of prajna paramita. Also, there are 18 instances of prajna: eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind, sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, objects of mind, as well as the consciousness of eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind. Also, there are 4 instances of prajna: suffering, its cause, its cessation, and the path to cessation. Also, there are 6 instances of prajna: generosity, pure precepts, calm patience, diligence, quiet meditation, and wisdom. There is also a single instance of prajna paramita manifesting itself right now: unsurpassed, complete, perfect awakening. Also, there are 3 instances of prajna: past, present, and future. Also, there are 6 instances of prajna: earth, water, fire, wind, space, and consciousness. Also, 4 instances of prajna are going on daily: walking, standing, sitting, and lying down. There was a monk in the assembly of Shakyamuni Tathagata. He thought to himself, I should venerate and make prostrations to this most profound prajna paramita. Although prajna paramita teaches that within all things there is neither arising nor extinguishing, there are practical approaches such as precepts, meditation, wisdom, emancipation, and insight resulting from emancipation. Also, there is a practical approach consisting of the ranks of entering the stream, once returning, non-returning, and arhat. Also, self-awakening is a practical approach. Unsurpassable, perfect awakening is also a practical approach. The triple treasure of Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha is also a practical approach. Turning the wondrous Dharma wheel, saving various sentient beings, is also a practical approach. The Buddha knew the monk's thoughts. So it is, so it is. The most profound prajna paramita is indeed subtle and difficult to fathom. The monk realizes now that by venerating and making prostrations to all things, he is venerating and making prostrations to prajna, which teaches that even though there is neither arising nor ceasing, there is arising and ceasing. In this very moment of veneration and prostration, prajna manifests itself in practical approaches, such as precepts, meditation, wisdom, and so forth, until serving various sentient beings. This moment of veneration is called nothingness. The approaches to nothingness thus become practical. This veneration is the most profound prajna paramita, subtle and difficult to fathom. Indra asked the elder Subhuti, "Venerable one, when Bodhisattva Mahasattvas want to study the most profound prajna paramita, how should they do it?" Subhuti replied, "Kausika, when Bodhisattva Mahasattvas want to study the most profound prajna paramita, they should study it as empty space. Therefore, to study prajna is itself empty space. Empty space is studying prajna." Indra spoke again to the Buddha. "World honored one, when good men and women accept and keep, read and recite, ponder in accord with reality, and expound to others this profound prajna paramita, which you have just presented, how can I protect them? World honored one, I simply wish that you bestow your compassion and teach me." At that time, the elder Subhuti said to Indra, "Kausika, do you see a dharma that can be protected or not?" Indra replied, "No, venerable one. I don't see any dharma that I can protect." Subhuti said, "Kausika, when good men and good women speak as you have, the most profound prajna paramita is itself protection. If good men and women act as you said, they are never separate from the most profound prajna paramita. You should know that even if all human and non-human beings wanted to harm them, it would not be possible to do so. Kausika, if you want to protect them, you should do as you said. Wanting to protect the most profound prajna paramita and all bodhisattvas is not different from wanting to protect empty space. You should know that accepting and keeping, reading and reciting and pondering in accord with reality are nothing other than protecting prajna. The desire to protect is accepting and keeping, reading and reciting, and so on. My late master, the ancient Buddha, said, "The whole body is like a mouth hanging in space." This is Dogen Zenji again, going back to Dogen Zenji. So the ancient Buddha said, "The whole body is like a mouth hanging in empty space," not questioning the winds from east, west, south, or north. Equally, all of them speaking of prajna. Ding dong a ling, ding dong. This is how the prajna has been expressed authentically through Buddhas and ancestors. The whole body is prajna. All others, which include the self, are prajna. The whole self, which includes others, is prajna. The entire universe, east, west, south, and north, is prajna. Shakyamuni Buddha said, "Shariputra, all these sentient beings should make offerings and prostrations to prajna paramita, as they do to a living Buddha. They should contemplate prajna paramita, just as they make offerings and prostrations to Buddha Bhagavat. This is surprising me. What is the reason? Prajna paramita is not different from Buddha Bhagavat. Buddha Bhagavat is not different from prajna paramita. Prajna itself is itself, prajna paramita is itself Buddha Bhagavat. Buddha Bhagavat is itself prajna paramita. What is the reason? Shariputra. This is because all supreme awakened Tathagatas issue forth from prajna paramita. Shariputra. This is because all bodhisattva mahasattvas, pratyeka Buddhas, arhats, non-returners, once returners, stream enterers, and so on, issue from prajna paramita. Shariputra. This is because the way of the 10 good deeds in the world, the 4 quiet meditations, the 4 formless samadhis, and the 5 divine powers all issue from prajna paramita. Therefore, Buddha Bhagavat is itself prajna paramita. Prajna paramita is nothing other than all beings. All these beings are empty in form, without arising or existing, neither defiled nor pure, neither increasing nor decreasing. Actualizing this prajna paramita is to actualize Buddha Bhagavat. Inquire into it, practice it, making offerings and prostrations to prajna paramita is attending and serving Buddha Bhagavat. Attending and serving all beings is itself Buddha Bhagavat. Okay. Well, something happened there that surprised me, so not sure what. So I'm going to try to be better about not going on too long. You know, the original intent on these talks was to be finished by 11:30, but that's not really practical, I don't think. But I'll try to be a little bit more brief, and I'm going to have to give less information, I think, each week. So for this this time, I'm just going to talk a little bit about what this means to me. I think that'll, I mean, just a tiny piece of what it means to me. You know, that's some tiny piece up that's rolling around up here, but the real meaning is, you know, much more than this. But you know, just on a general level, when I think of Dogen Zenji's teaching, and I think it's expressed beautifully in this piece, on a kind of overview of just the difficulty that we're having in our society today, for example, it seems like the medicine. You know, I'm going to get a bit more personal in a minute, but this it really seems to me like what we need now more than ever. I know that there have been many periods of the world, of course, that seemed like things were falling apart, but we seem to be in one of those sometimes, you know, to me. So the fact that Dogen Zenji says we can't do anything outside of the community of all beings, that the reality, our own suffering and our own life and our own joy and happiness can only be connected and addressed and practiced within the community of all beings. And we've really seemed to have forgotten that in our society. Today we're really so invested in our isms, in our political views, our religious views, and our kind of desire to get what we want, that we make it seem that we have very little in common when we're all living the same life, and we have much more in common actually than we don't have in common. We tend to think this is the reality up here, but it's such a tiny piece of the reality of our life. And Dogen Zenji's teachings, I think, really address this in a beautiful way. So and it's really important to understand that searching kind of for our own agenda and our own awakening without understanding and honoring and making offerings to the community of all beings is delusion. If we don't do that, and we will never actually find the peace that we're looking for, and we create more suffering when we try to see ourselves as a separate entity outside of the community, of all beings and of all things. And today I think we know more and more. Science tells us, sociology, psychology, all kinds of other types of ways of viewing reality, or the world, are many of them coming to this understanding that there really is no individual outside of the community that can be healthy, separated from the community of all beings. So just to get more personal, a little more personal about this in my life history, but I grew up in a very kind of not a strict religious environment, but the tradition that I was raised in was pretty strict. Our family wasn't necessarily, super strict about it, but the information that I was getting about what it is to live a good life and how to manifest it was a pretty strict, Christian tradition. And it just one of many, many Christian traditions that can manifest so many different ways, so just like Buddhism, there's so many different ways that it can manifest, but this particular way was there's kind of one reality, and you need to find it. There's one God, one reality, and you need to get in touch in accordance with that. And if you don't, there's a big problem. There's good and evil, and if you don't accord with good, you're evil. And so when I reached the time of a teenager, I really questioned that. Again, I talk about this before too, but I started listening to the Beatles, and that really ruined everything, like as far as my trying to be a good boy. And it made me kind of think about the world in different ways, and want to explore different types of ways to encounter the world. But without going into the details, they were tumultuous years for me, my teenage years, when I was 13, 14. I ended up getting into some trouble with the law. I mean, not really bad. I never hurt anybody or directly. I mean, I never physically hurt anybody, but I hurt my family a lot, and I hurt other people too. And I ended up, some real problems that was mystifying to my parents, and kind of, teenage insanity, teenage boy insanity for this teenage boy was. And, but long story short, I had this period where I just felt like I kind of bottomed out, and I kind of lost what I felt like were all my friends and my direction in life and everything that was meaningful to me, and really felt kind of, desperate and depressed, and frankly not really wanting to go on. And the cure for me at that time ended up being coming back to my original religion. And it worked. I mean, I had this kind of searching. I had this person in the church who was trying to help me, and I ended up, I had this religious experience, and I felt like, God told me that I was okay, and that I knew what reality, the truth was, and I was going to embrace it in my life and manifest it. And it really, it really helped. And so long story short again, after some period though, I probably should maybe talk about the experience a little bit. It was a kind of experience where, I kind of felt like I was just I was just kind of one with everything and embraced in complete acceptance and love. And everything was okay. And I was part of, God or reality, whatever, everything was okay and beautiful. And it was an ecstatic experience. And nothing, I had never had anything like it before. And it came as a result of some intense prayer practice that I was doing. And so, I say as a result, that's not the only reason, of course. That was the immediate thing that was happening before, this experience happened. Of course, many other factors went into making that experience happen. And eventually, long story short again, this feeling of being close to God, was dissipated. And it was always at some point kind of approaching, and then not approaching, feeling worthy, unworthy, feeling like, I understood, to feeling like I didn't understand and I wasn't good enough to understand, and eventually feeling like I really want to do other things that seem to be prohibited by my tradition. Is this me really, But the thing that really made me break, I think, from the tradition, or as I said again, the kind of one factor I can point to immediately preceding it is that I had a best friend that I had known since second grade, which is a long time. I still know him. We're still good friends, but and he was tolerant enough to listen to the teachings of this religion. He was practicing in a different form of Christianity, and in this religion that I was practicing in, you must accept it, or you can't be like fully embraced unless you accept this particular tradition. You can't fully realize God, or whatever way you want to put it. Doesn't mean you're going to hell if you don't necessarily, but excuse me. So he listened to these teachings from some missionaries, and he then, told me later, he said, thank you, but I think your religion is good for you and mine is good for me. And that was kind of like, well, wait a minute, how can that, that doesn't make any sense. But and on a certain level, though, I knew exactly what he meant. And so that was kind of the part of like, how could it be that this person wouldn't be glorified the way that I was? Because I knew him, and I knew, to me, he was a beautiful person that I loved. And how would it be that he was somehow, we were not on the same spiritual level. It didn't make any sense. And when I started thinking of it more and more, how is it that other people are left out, or other beings, or, how is it that there's this hierarchy of God's love, or the spiritual source, or whatever, you want to call it? How is it that some things are left out? And so what happened, what I realized what was happening, when I think of it now especially, is that I was always chasing after the experience of God that I had before. And sometimes it would seem it would be close, and sometimes it was far away. And it ended up being a sort of cycle of just running around, trying to get this experience again that I had. So later, long story short, again, I left as a result of certain things that happened, including the ones that I explained. And, it was a very difficult way to leave. It was difficult to leave because it was in my, upbringing and in my being. But in my 20s, I never, I was kind of really floating and not doing a lot of different things, trying to find some truth, and feeling lost, and never really feeling, like I would find it, again. And I encountered Buddhism then, but I kind of had a brush with it. But the type of Buddhism that I encountered then, or the filter that I received it through, seemed like a Buddhism was kind of a negation of life. Like the point was to get out of this samsaric cycle, like this life is a mistake and you need to get out. And I think that's true for some traditions of Buddhism, but this isn't at all, of course, what Dogen Zenji is saying. So anyway, I'm going to wrap this up. To long story short, again, when I finally encountered Zen, this teaching of Dogen Zenji's teaching, like each moment is Buddha. These deluded thoughts, these the people I love and hate, all experience, all of these things, are Buddha. There's no chasing around my own preferences as far as what to find Buddha, or to, I can't be lost from reality at any time. All things are included. And somehow this, making offerings to this reality is the Buddha itself, rather than, chasing around trying to find an experience of Buddha or an experience of God. It just really hit me like a as deeply true, or deeply, even saying true isn't really a very good way of saying it, but just the nature of our life. How can we exclude certain parts of our life from the reality that supports everything? And how can we only be chasing one element of life, or saying one element of life is good and another part of our life is always bad, ultimately? So of course there are many, many things to talk about in this. I mean, there's much discussion about good and evil, and the nature of suffering, of course, that isn't being addressed in necessarily in this fascicle or in what I just said, but basically the understanding that this moment the way that we approach it and practice with it is God or Buddha or reality seem to be so much more deeply real, to me. And I think that's the main thing that Dogen Zenji, is saying in this fascicle. When we understand that each moment is Buddha and we make offerings to it, then we are Buddha. We are connected to all things. But when we're running around, trying to find Buddha according to our own idea of it or whatever reality we call it, God or Buddha or the universe, we're just chasing something very, limited. So, even those ideas of chasing or our desire, if we accept them and practice with them, those are Buddha. At the time in my 20s, I did a lot of things trying to find something that felt right or that felt genuine, like a lot of self-indulgence, a lot of reading different types of philosophies or, but in the end, no matter what desire is fulfilled or no matter what curiosity is fulfilled, things are always changing and we're going to feel a different way. So how are we ever going to find some place that we stay when we're feeling exactly the way we want to all of the time? But our relationship with our experience, the way that we feel and the way it connects us to the present moment is what Dogen Zenji is talking about. Whether we see this feeling of boredom as something to run away from or manipulate or, make into something else, or whether we accept, embrace, and honor it, understanding that in some way it is the deepest reality. That makes all the difference in our life. And the other thing that's a basic teaching here of his is, he says, keep inquiring. That's a very basic teaching of fundamental teaching of Dogen Zenji. Don't listen to what I just wrote. Keep inquiring, understand yourself. And Zazen is your only true teacher. No one can tell you how to live your life. No one can tell you, teach you the deepest teachings that you need to receive. It's only your practice and only your own life that can really teach and guide you. And yet, we need we need some help doing that. We need some help from what we usually call these teachings of the Buddha. We can either see them as kind of isms or dogmatic things to try to, cling to and perfect, or we can see them as guides to apply to our life or things to realize in our own, life. So anyway, these are just a few thoughts I had about it right now. Let's see if there's anything else I wanted to make sure I mentioned before we stop. I'll just add one more thing, I think, which might be a good way to kind of express my experience. We can kind of think of it philosophically, usually in Christianity, we think of, or theistic religions, we think of it as a sort of affirming type of approach. Like there is something to live for. There is some real ultimate existence. There is something deep, beautiful to continue expressing and searching for. And Some people think of, say, let's say something like Nagarjuna, who negates everything that we can think of as real, or like the kind of emptiness teachings as a kind of negative or a no. Like there's a yes of a theistic approach, and there's a no of an emptiness kind of approach. And of course, Dogen Zenji is saying we go beyond this. We go beyond this yes and no. And so when I was the teenager, it seemed like the great yes, that I was, yes, life has meaning, and I found it, and I will express it. And yet it felt like at some point when I really went full on into that, there became a big no. No to this, no to that, no to any other way of seeing things except this one, or no to any other expression of a life except for this way. And so it came to feel that way. And I think in the Heart Sutra, for example, the first part is a kind of a no, and the second part is a kind of a yes. And then we don't really think of that. We think of the Heart Sutra as just kind of a negation. But Dogen Zenji is going a little bit more deeply into this yes beyond yes and no, I think. And it's kind of another way, we can think of it, because whenever we get stuck in an ism, whenever we get stuck in dogmatic thinking, we're saying no to life. I think we're really saying yes to our ideas, into our biases, into conceptualization, and we're saying no to the reality that's unfolding before us. And yet, if we don't put some limit, or if we don't, if we don't acknowledge that there is some practical approach, or there is some kind of discrimination that needs to happen between wholesome and unwholesome, we're really lost. And just, we all know, those of us who have tried that, or kind of wandered aimlessly, searching for something meaningful, know what that means when we say yes to everything, or when we say no to everything. It's a problem kind of either way. And Dogen Zenji's teaching, to me, is a way of going beyond this yes and no, expressing it, the reality beyond yes and no, here and now, in this moment. Okay, so I think I'll stop here because it's noon somehow, and next week we can start talking a bit more, about the text, and maybe the relationship between the Heart Sutra and the text, and the first few lines. So, but in the meantime, did anyone have anything they wanted to say today? Any comments or observations?
So I have a question. So in my daily practice, daily life, after I get up from Zazen, in my day-to-day things, I constantly see if I'm caught up in thought. Are you able to hear me?
Yeah, I'm hearing you. I'm trying to turn up my volume, Mahesh. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I don't know why I'm having these problems now. Can you talk now?
Yeah. Can you hear me? Okay.
Not so well. I don't know what's.
Is it just you, or can others hear me? Or
everybody else can hear you?
Because my internet connection is also not very stable, so I'm not sure if others can hear me.
let's see a minute. Well, I can hear you. It's just a little difficult, so I'll get closer to the machine.
Okay. So I think you kind of referred to this at the end of your talk, but in my daily practice, I keep if I'm doing something other than what I'm just doing, if I'm just thinking about something, let's say I'm driving, instead of just driving, if I'm thinking about something, I let go and then come back to just doing the task, whatever task I'm doing in my daily life. Whenever I remember the times when I just keep thinking, probably like a lot of times, but whenever I notice that I'm thinking and not just doing the task, I just come back and do that. So this is fine as a practice, but again, when you said everything is Buddha, when I'm doing this practice, maybe there is a sense that when I'm lost in thought and I'm not just doing what I'm doing, that's not desired, that's not Buddha, or like there is some kind of a thing when I do this practice. So how do I, is it okay, Eman, is it okay to do this practice no matter like, yeah, even though everything is Buddha, just, I think this is still doing the practice is fine, I think, but I want to just ask if, yeah, just it's okay, or am I overthinking on that?
Yeah, so it's kind of a tricky thing because even our delusions are part of ultimate reality. So if we get into some kind of mode of criticizing them or negating them or saying that thinking is bad, it's a problem because those issue from emptiness too. So on some level, it's, and this is what Dogen Zenji's question was when he left from Japan to China. You know, if everything is okay, ultimately, why is it that we need to practice, you know, at all? So, I mean, I think the answer is really for him is that practice is what realizes a human being, like what really is a genuine human being. You know, for human beings, we think, and we to realize the ultimate way of living, to be a mature adult that takes responsibility for their own life and nurtures others, we need to practice. So that's just the way human life is. I mean, we can't really say this about birds. We don't know, you know, what a bird, they don't worry about this kind of thing. So we don't have to worry about the philosophy so much behind it, but what is the way that our life really blooms fully now in this moment. So yeah, on one level, thinking is what we do, but if we don't practice with it, it causes suffering. And that's the basic teaching of the Buddha, you know. Thinking tends to take over our life because it's very seductive for people. And there's some way that the mind wants to be, you know, the head of a person's life, no pun intended, but wants to take over. So that is like studying our human life and taking care of it the way, you know, a bird learns from its parents how to fly, or it studies the best way to build its nest, or discerns about the best way to put, you know, the nest together for its offspring or its family. But I can't do it like a bird because I'm a human being and we think. Human beings are characterized by thinking. So it's, this Dharma, of course, is unfathomable. And on one hand, it's okay, whatever we do, this reality is just what it is. But if we don't practice, we see that we suffer and we cause suffering for others. So on the one hand, we see everything is okay, but when we see that, the heart opens and we don't want to cause suffering. That's what a human being, does. In the ultimate way, we call it a Buddha, when someone actually becomes a completely mature human being. That's my opinion. When someone is actually, just a mature, fully mature human being, we call that a Buddha. So I don't know. Hopefully that's helpful, but it's on the one hand, we need to pay attention to cause and effect, and on the other hand, we need to understand that everything is okay. In order to, express that idea that everything is okay, we need to pay attention to the details. Yeah, so that's what Dogen Zenji, I think, is saying partially in his teaching and in this text. Each detail is Buddha and worth paying attention to as Buddha. Okay, was there anything else today? Lacey had something?
Yes, I've got kind of a question, comment, and then 2 questions, but I'll try to keep them quick. So one of the things that I was reminded in listening to this was I went to go many years ago when I was first trying to study Buddhism. I went to a Tibetan teacher retreat, and there was just one thing about the way he would talk that that just really tickled me. In his translations, he wouldn't ever just say also. It was always as well as also. And so I just always I thought that was that's stuck with me, and I kind of feel like hearing all of these alsos now in this text makes me think back to that, and then it makes me think about like going from an either or mentality to the both and mentality, but then also as well as also. So I just thought that was funny. But there's 2 things that I'd really like to ask about, and I know you're going to go into detail in these, but if we could just get a quick summary of these 2 things to help us understand it as we read it by ourselves today after this or before. But so there's 2 situations here that I think are kind of possibly an opposite reaction going on, possibly. So on the second page, we have, at that time, the elder Subhuti said to Indra, Kausika, do you see a Dharma that can be protected or not? Is Kausika like an endearing term? Is he calling him his first name? Like, or so there's that question. But then so I could think of it as like, it says Indra spoke again to the Buddha, world honored one, whereas like would it be similar to saying to Buddha Siddhartha, like a personalized answer, or like straight to who that person is, possibly. But then, so we have this possibly personalized, endearing answer to this one. And then on the third page, we have Shariputra. Shariputra, he's saying it over and over again, where it could be like, grabbing him by the shoulders or something. So just for our understanding of how to read this text, is that something you could touch on a little bit, please? And you can absolutely say no.
No, well, it's kind of an interesting point. I hadn't thought about that, of why he calls him Kausika, because I think Kausika was his Indra's name in the lifetime before he became Indra. So, in Buddhism, Indra is the king of the gods or whatever, but he's still in samsara. And someday another person will become king of the gods, or, this is the cycle of samsara. It may be many, many years that you're in this heavenly realm, where one person is the king or the ruler of the gods. But anyway, the lifetime before he had this wonderful rebirth. His name was Kausika, apparently. And so, I hadn't thought about the fact that he could be making some connection there between, samsara and Indra, or just could be some kind of a term of endearment, as you say, but just also bringing it back to just the reality of the person, here and now. And I think it is, is interesting. I was going to talk about it next week. I think that he has this conversation with Indra, because we know in Mahayana Buddhism that Indra's net is in Zen, a very important image that I talk about often, the universe itself, or Prajnaparamita itself, as being Indra's net. And but the Buddha actually did, in the early canon, speak to Indra after his awakening. And I think there's some, significance to that. So, it's a good point. And it's something for everyone, to kind of think about. So maybe, it's somehow pointing to his individual nature, and the the fact that even the highest realm is based in individuality. These kinds of things. It's the highest realm is still based in samsara, but yeah. And then Subhuti, I think, was like sort of the most intellectual, disciple, if I remember correctly. He was sort of the person who was most learned, and there's probably some, reason. Subhuti is addressed, often in Mahayana texts, I think, because of that.
Thank you. I forgot to ask the second part to this. My second question was, could you clarify, if he's bringing up Indra, and that is a Hindu god, right? Is Buddha Bhagavat also in that same vein? Thank you.
Yeah, so that's right. I mean, Buddhism kind of incorporated those Vedic gods and goddesses even before, I think it was really Hinduism, but they of course, Hinduism and Buddhism come from the same stream, and but Buddhism didn't try to just negate the culture of the time, completely, but took those in and used them as an expression of Buddha's teaching. So yeah, and Buddha Bhagavat, I think Bhagavat means world honored one. It's just sort of it's a double honorific, if I'm not mistaken. It just means Buddha, the world honored one. Buddha means the awakened, something like the awakened world honored one. So that there's a whole thing, actually. Buddhism, they didn't call Shakyamuni Buddha, really, apparently. Buddha was just a general name for an awakened person back then, and Buddhism didn't start being called Buddhism until later. So it's a good point that term is actually inherited, of course, from the culture, the same culture, I guess, as the Vedic culture, probably. Yeah.
Hello, do you hear me well? Okay, thank you. Well, just like 2 or 3 things. First, I just want to say thanks. I appreciate your approach, your personal approach. I appreciate that. The second thing is it also makes me think about the huge value of Zazen in a multicultural world, in a multicultural religious world. I don't know if that makes sense, but in a world with many kind of different religions, Zazen in the way explains it in this text is it's all embracing. I don't know if I'm saying things that make sense. I hope so, but it includes everything. We can continue Dogen's text, put in prayer. It's also Prajnaparamita, dancing or the practice of Sufis are also Prajnaparamita. To serve others or help others is also Prajnaparamita. All religions, all religious practice are instance or practical approaches of Prajnaparamita. So I think that it's a huge value, but it also demands, I think, a lot of responsibility, because what I feel is that when we sit in Zazen is the highest offering or something similar to that. It's if we were going to talk with God, you do it in a really respectful manner with many care, because you're talking with the highest truth. So I think that in Zazen might happen something similar, but also makes me wonder, there is so much in Zazen, as we have talked before. Zazen is a Buddhism's teachings are a footnote of Zazen. So we can say almost all teachings are footnotes of Zazen, in a sense, teachings that are beyond Buddhism, since everything is Prajnaparamita. So I think that demands a lot of responsibility and care in the way in which I approach to practice. So, well, many things I have said, but thank you, Shobogenzo Sensei, for the lecture, and yeah, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for that, Ryushin. And it's better, I didn't really say it explicitly, of course, you know, Shobogenzo is basically, I think, Zazen instruction. So it's really about our Zazen. And so is this piece of Prajnaparamita, I mean, this piece of Makahannyaharamitsu. But so if it's really true, if we don't understand what Dogen Zenji is saying, if we don't understand what it means when he says our desires are Buddha, you know, the 12 sense fields, the subject-object relationship itself is Buddha. If we don't understand what he means by that, it's very dangerous. And that's the kind of thing that he really reacted against in his day, because that teaching was there, this original Enlightenment teaching of, you know, kind of medieval Japanese period, where it just was like, all you had to do was kind of know that you're Buddha, and there was no practice. That was the complete enlightenment there. And so, you know, a lot of suffering, misunderstanding, and distress arises through the misinterpretation of these Prajnaparamita teachings. And even, you know, Nagarjuna, who we think of as sort of the ultimate teacher of the Prajnaparamita teachings, he said, you know, the cure for being stuck in eternalism or in the yes, or being stuck in truth or dogma, is the emptiness teaching. But he said there is no cure for being stuck in the no teaching of emptiness. You know, he said it that strongly. Like, if we are stuck thinking that nothing matters or everything goes, anything goes, it's a real problem. As you say, we don't have responsibility. There can be no responsibility unless we think of the practical approach as the individual self, and take responsibility for our practice and our relationship with other people, and study cause and effect. And this goes back to what Mahesh was saying, you know. So there's some kind of discernment, not in our Zazen, but when we're driving or when we're interacting with someone, you know, we need to practice and try to be fully present in this moment. And we can better do that by studying, you know, our karmic tendencies, or cause and effect. So, you know, like, one thing I was going to say to Mahesh was, when we're trying to take these teachings into our daily life, I was talking to Russ about this not so long ago. I mean, I think it's something like maybe what a great musician or a jazz musician or something that which I am not, or you know, they study scales, of course, for many years, or some are prodigies, I guess, and don't have to do it much. But usually a musician studies the map of music on a page, or at least they study the theory, or they study the scales and they play them over and over again and their relationship to them. And so that's, for us, it's kind of studying the karmic effect of things on our mind, and how we, you know, what makes me angry, or what, how do I better deal with my anger when it arises, or how do I manage my sorrow? You know, what are things to do to nurture it? But in the moment of speaking to a person, we just let the wisdom arise. So if a person, you know, a trumpet player is thinking about scales when they try to play an improvisation, it's probably not going to be improvisation. And yet, if they haven't studied the cause and effect of those scales, it's very difficult, to improvise. So, it gets tricky here, because anytime we can play music, one note can be music. So when you start playing shakuhachi or something, you just learned how to play one note. Or when you start studying calligraphy, you make one line, and that is the complete expression of that moment. It's like the complete expression of enlightenment. And yet we keep studying so that in our relationships, we can be more skillful, as an expression of that enlightenment. So, it's okay to say, well, I need to focus on my driving, but at some point we understand how to just let go, and the thoughts might come up and help us discern even in the moment. Probably a trumpet player, they do think, some thoughts come up through their mind, but the main thing is the moment, and all the other things going on are kind of the scenery of the present moment. Like the Uchama Roshi said, the scenery of Zazen. So instead of latching onto that conceptual stuff going on as the present, as the moment, we allow it to come through us and inform us and, energize us. Okay, anything else we needed to say before signing off? Okay, well, thank you very much, everyone. I hope you have a good week, and I hope you enjoy studying this text if you're interested.